My name is Emily Dolbear, and I am president of the Brookline Education Foundation. The Brookline Education Foundation is so pleased to be supporting our third class of Margaret Metzger Fellows. The Margaret Metzger Fellowship honors a beloved educator and community member. It also celebrates what is important about education. And I thank Margaret and my predecessor, Ian Rothman, who's actually here with his son, for this list. Teaching and teachers matter. Knowledge and making sense of our world is a lifelong pursuit for us all. And magical things happen for students in classrooms every day. Tonight we celebrate the classroom, these brave teachers, and we celebrate Margaret Metzger and her mentorship of so many. On behalf of the Brookline Education Foundation, I would like to thank you all for joining us. It is now my honor to introduce Victoria Ippolito, Margaret Metzger's niece, who will speak about Margaret and her life's work.
Thank you, Emily. So welcome friends and family and supporters of the Margaret Metzger Fellowship and the wonderful teachers who participate in it. My name is Victoria Ippolito, and I am Margaret's niece. And, like many of you, I had the great honor of teaching with Margaret at Brookline High School. When I started at Brookline, I received what I thought was a dream schedule: 4 sections of 9th and 10th grade honors English. For those of you who don't know, in other schools, honors classes are saved for teachers with the most seniority, and newcomers are frequently given top classes. I shared my delight with Margaret, and in typical Margaret fashion, she gave me the unvarnished truth. Of course you're teaching honors, Victoria. Those kids are sponges and can learn by watching paint dry. The most challenging classes are reserved for the master teachers who are up for the challenge. Margaret is a master teacher. Each year, she went through all of her old lessons. She tossed out what was unsuccessful, too gimmicky, too boring, too much work for me and not enough work for the kids. She tried new ideas and planned lessons for particular students. How can I reach that quiet female athlete who tells me she hates to read? She challenged herself. How can I teach the Odyssey for the 30th time and still be excited and engaged with the material? And the lessons she created were legendary. I remember observing once her demonstrate a class of seniors how the structure of the Decameron worked with Legos. She brought in a huge Santa Claus bag full of Legos. I think her son still has them and plays them with the son. And the kids built the Decameron out of Legos. Or Plato's allegory of the cave, which she reenacted with stuffed animals, bungee cords, and a flashlight. Or a final exam she did one year, which was made of a dozen large Goya paintings, where kids had to select 3 paintings to write about theme. But her greatest lesson was the one she gave to her fellow teachers. She taught us how to love teaching and to be real and honest with students and each other. I was lucky enough to participate in her new teacher mentor program, and each week she would send us thoughts about teaching, all with the subject line, "Not urgent," knowing we were already overwhelmed with our own classrooms. Here's an example of one of those emails. Not urgent. Some initial thoughts. Dear folks, at the beginning of the year, I'm always reminded that the primary emotion in all classrooms is fear. The students fear that they will be called on, humiliated, stared at, ignored, found out. They fear each other, the material, the teacher. We teachers have the same fears. We fear kids will have discovered that we don't totally know what we're doing, that we are faking it some of the time, and that we are barely in control of the situation. We fear the inevitable tests of our authority, and frankly, 25 of them are always more clever than one of us. We can't outmaneuver them, so we have to get them on our side. On the other hand, the very act of making alliances with adolescents is fraught with trouble. They correctly suspicious and dismissive of any attempt to be their friends. Being so nice they'll have to be nice in return just plain doesn't work. Cozying up with them is dangerous. Being too honest about your self-doubts will only give them ammunition. As every parent knows, teenagers go for the jugular. They always get you where it hurts most. So, we are left with the material. If we can make the material important to their lives, show them that the work we do will be valuable, that we enjoy working with them, and that we can and will help them achieve, then we have a good start. We must pretend more confidence than we actually feel. Students want to be reassured that we know what we are doing, reassuring them that we will help them privately, that we remember something about them, that we trust that they can do the work. All these make high expectations comforting and not terrifying. But the best news is, kids are flexible. If we get off on the wrong foot and stumble, we can try again. Just apologize, replan, restart. Myself, I've made backpedaling an art form. See you on Tuesday. Margaret taught other teachers how to demand rigor from their students and maintain their own selves. She published articles in Phi Delta Kappa in the Harvard Ed Review. She taught courses at Brown and led the new teacher mentor program. Margaret always considered herself so lucky to have a profession where her passion met the world's needs. And she felt lucky to be in Brookline, a place that values education and creates opportunities, like this one, for teachers to grow and become master teachers. It is hard to remember when you are in Brookline how good your schools are. There are districts in which 30% of the teaching staff leaves every year for greener pastures, which makes it hard to develop a master teacher. I want to give a huge shout out to the Brookline Education Foundation and all of the folks here who are supporting this scholarship and the work that helps your teachers become master teachers.
Thank you, Victoria. My name is John Andrews, and I'm a teacher at Brookline High School. I've been teaching here since 2001. I was one of the students that Margaret worked with at Brown when she was teaching there in the 90s, along with some other teachers who were in the room. And she encouraged me to come to Brookline, and so I did. I came up here to work with people like her and to be in a community that cared so much about education. It's powerful to hear Victoria bring Margaret's voice back in so directly in those emails. I heard a lot of those comments over the years from her, salty and encouraging. So it was really wonderful to hear that. What I learned from Margaret that affects us today is the power of teachers writing their stories and the power of writing as a way to understand what you're doing, that writing is thinking, and that through writing we understand ourselves and our craft. We reflect in a way that we would not if we're just sitting quietly or gossiping with a friend over a beer or watching television. That through writing we understand. And the power of this fellowship that encourages teachers and supports teachers to write and reflect on their practice of teaching is exactly something that Margaret would have valued. The other thing she valued was teachers telling their stories to the outside world. And so I'm excited to share with you the stories that our teachers have been working on this summer. We've organized them from kindergarten to senior year, so you're going to go through the life of a Brookline High School student from beginning to end, Brookline school system student from beginning to end. We're going to start with Liz Exton, who teaches kindergarten at Lawrence. One of the things Margaret focused on when I was in graduate school was the triangle of the student, the teacher, and the content, that we need to value and think about all three things. And I think Liz's piece called Becoming a Writer is a great introduction for us to think about that tonight. Liz.
Benjamin and Haruka color, Charlotte and Max write slowly, their mouths over-enunciating each sound in the word. Okay. Benjamin and Haruka color, Charlotte and Max write their mouths over-enunciating each sound in the word. During writing time, students work independently, transferring ideas from their heads onto paper in a way that is appropriate for them. Kindergartners use their personal interests, their open mind, and their excitement for learning to express themselves freely through drawing and writing. I love the promise writing time brings at the beginning of the year, and I anticipate the celebration in June the way kindergartners anticipate their birthdays. Students publish a piece of writing recognizing that their ideas are powerful, worthy of being saved and shared. Kindergartners learn that everyone has something important to say, that everyone can be a writer. But I also love how writing time offers me a glimpse into each student's passions and interests. It tells me who they are and what's important to them. Through conferencing, I spend time one-on-one with each student, learning about them and what they care about. I connect with them. Back in my classroom, Jesse builds a marker sword. He flicks the markers off the table and then gets up to get them. I keep watching. I should sit with him, I think. He needs my help. I didn't know how I was going to get him to write. I hadn't yet connected with him. I sat down anyway. It is my job to help him become a writer. Hi, Jesse. Tell me what you're working on. It's a book about how to build a ship. Oh, wow. Do you know about building ships? No, not really, but I like ships. Great. Well, let's think more about how to build a ship so you can get something down on your paper. You just build it, he said. Let's go to the block area and try to build a ship. Maybe that will help. I get up and walk over to the block area. Jesse follows me reluctantly. I get out some blocks and start building, determined to get Jesse to build a ship and write about it. Let's put this piece here, I say, placing a long wooden block on the rug, and then we add a mast. I am building a ship out of blocks, and boy, am I good. Jesse rolls around on the floor, picking up staples from the rug. Can I go to the bathroom? He asks. I let him go. I'm not getting anywhere anyway. I look at the clock. Writing time will be over soon, and Sophia bounds over asking me if I've decided who will share today. Sure, you can share, I mumble. I knock on the bathroom door again. Your time is up, let's go. Jesse comes out and again and plods back to his table. Why don't you write a title, I suggest. Then at least you'll have something on your paper. I survey the room one last time before asking the students to clean up. May, an ELL student, draws detailed pictures of her family. James bounces on a yoga ball as he writes. And Hannah sequences photos about feeding her fish. I feel warm inside. My eyes scan to Jesse's table. He is picking the staples out of his book and pressing the marker into the paper so hard it creates a hole. His book is blank. Well, at least the other 20 kids are writing. I can't get them all to be writers. It's just kindergarten, right? But this is my kindergarten, a place where students feel a sense of belonging, they take risks, and they become writers. After 15 years, I thought I had strategies for transforming all kindergartners into writers. But with Jesse, I was coming up short. I reach out to colleagues. My literacy specialist suggests I ask his parents about his interests. Their response? Minecraft. The next day, I sit with Jesse first. Hey, I hear you like Minecraft. Would Would you maybe want to write about it? His eyes light up and he starts talking. I pull out some sticky notes and try to get down his ideas. I slap the sticky notes into his 5-page book and say, "Great, now you have some reminders about what you told me. Go ahead and get started." I walk away. I sit next to Noah. "Tell me what you're working on." Noah reads his book to me. Dogs can fetch. Dogs can eat. Dogs can poop. He doesn't even laugh. He's not being funny. This is serious stuff, this writing, and he is taking it seriously. Sure, it's in all capital letters without spaces between the words, but he's getting his ideas down on paper. I remind Noah about using lowercase letters and using spaces to make his writing easier to read. And then I move on. "Thomas, Anna, tell me what you're working on." Around the room I go. I pull out step-by-step drawing cards for some kids. I gesture to the alphabet chart for others. I wonder how you could add more details to this picture, I say. I look up. Jesse is nowhere to be found. The bathroom. I knock. His little voice replies, "I'm in here." "Okay, I need you to finish up and come out." I glance at his paper. There are some scribbles and something resembling a square that might be related to Minecraft. I really don't know. Another day with nothing. I was stumped. Every child has a story to tell and can be a writer, but it wasn't coming for Jesse. What was I missing? Was he too young? Were his hands too weak for writing and drawing? I hadn't let that stop me before. It was about the process, not the product, I reminded myself. But Jesse wasn't even participating in the process. I was dragging him through it. I wanted Jesse to feel like a writer, like he had something important to say. I needed him to realize that his ideas were valuable enough to share with others. I had exhausted all options. I felt defeated. Was this really going to be my first student who didn't have a published book at the publishing party? That afternoon, as I shuffled papers, I noticed Jesse's name next to chess on the after-school activity list. The next day, I offer up chess at the games table. Jesse falls out of his spot and onto the pieces when I call him to make a choice. At the table, he talks with Nathan. "Okay, so here's the pawn, and this is a bishop, and these are knights. You want to be black because then you have an advantage." Children start to gather at the table to learn more. I sit down too. "Jesse, you know so much about chess. Maybe you'd like to write about it?" His eyes grow wide. He smiles. "Yeah, I know so much about chess, and I'm really good at it. Can I write about it right now?" "Well, you can, but you're in the middle of a game. Maybe after?" I offer. I feel hopeful, but have I squashed his excitement by not letting him run right over to the writing table? There's always that doubt. Did I do enough? Have I tried everything? When writing time starts the next day, Jesse is one of the first students to pull out a pencil and get started writing and drawing. He draws a chessboard on the cover. "About chess," he writes. He turns the page. There are 16 pawns. There he is, writing and drawing, his ideas falling onto the pages, saving his important ideas on paper, like a writer. I conference with students. "Tell me what you're working on." Jesse approaches me. "Bathroom?" I ask. "No. Do you have a stapler? I need to add more pages to my book."
It's about thinking and rethinking and rethinking and trying another option. And it's about building connections with students. The next piece by Jeremy Ward, who's a third grade teacher at Lawrence, has been and explore the importance of connections between teacher and student.
Before I start, I'm going to read a quote by Herman Melville. "We cannot live only for ourselves. 1,000 fibers connect us to our fellow men, and among those fibers, as sympathetic threads, our actions run as causes, and they come back to us as effects." My piece is called 1,000 Fibers. Amongst the din of third grade snack time, I called Ian over to my desk. Because snack was a less structured time. Kids were talking and eating, however many, including Ian, were quietly drawing at their desks, while others whirled around them like dust devils across a classroom desert. I almost felt bad pulling Ian away from his drawing time. Most days, he wouldn't even eat snack, just head downturned towards a piece of paper, drawing desperately intricate dragons and mythical creatures. My intent was to invite him to have lunch with me that day, a rare offer that most kids in 3W would excitedly jump at, but Ian accepted very cautiously, almost reluctantly. "I just thought we could talk a bit," I told him, trying to reassure him he was not in trouble. Ian was one of those kids who immediately stands out when you look at a class photo or watch a group of kids following their teacher down the hallway. A waif of a boy, he could easily be mistaken for a first grader. Add to this his shock of ginger curls and mischievous smile, he'd look just as at home in the Shire surrounded by hobbits as he would on a playground climbing structure. Beneath Ian's striking physical appearance was a sensitive, kind-hearted, almost naive little boy. Ian had come to my classroom the day before school started with his mom, a lovely woman who appreciated getting to meet me and let Ian see the classroom. The guidance counselors had let me know Ian's family situation was complicated. Any conversations about it with administrators usually began with hushed tones that often precede the sharing of confidential, sensitive family information. After some chit-chat, Ian milled around the room, excitedly pointing out his friends' names written on crisp new name tags on their desks. I asked him about his summer, and he asked me about the things we'd be studying in third grade. Mom asked Ian to step out in the hall so we could talk. Mom told me things I already knew about Ian's father and why he would not be around to do pickup or drop-off. Having grown up around addiction, I felt a connection. It was kind of crazy, despite only knowing me for 8 minutes. She was telling me deeply personal, private information. I was struck with how calm and matter-of-fact she was in speaking to me. Her almost business-like tone was one of a mother who had to be stoic for her son. As she ticked off the list of restrictions Ian's dad had around school interactions, I knew she had conveyed this list to many caregivers before. I wanted to connect with her, so I dropped in a veiled reference to my own experience with what she was saying, something like, "I remember that with my father." Either way, whatever I said, it seemed pathetically inadequate, all things considered. I'd known this woman and her child for 11 minutes. She'd given me an open window into some of her family's deepest, darkest history, and I'd only dared to dip my toe into the cold water before pulling it back, unsure of the safety of what was below the surface. That had all happened before school. Now it was snack time, and my meeting with Ian was imminent. Just after 12:30, Ian nervously poked his head around the doorway. Lunch tray in hand, a floppy piece of cafeteria pizza barely fit on the tray, which also housed a fruit cup and a bottle of water. "Come on in," I said in the most reassuring voice I could muster. I stared jealously at his cafeteria pizza, which had come a long way since my days in school. "Pizza day, huh? Looks pretty good," I said, launching into small talk. For as much as I felt making small talk with 8 and 9-year-olds was a strength of mine, I couldn't have felt more uncomfortable in that moment, like an introvert dropped into the middle of cocktail hour. Not knowing what else to say, I stuck with the food theme. Pizza's my favorite food. How about you? Thai food, definitely, said Ian enthusiastically. We continued to speak about favorite foods for quite some time. For Ian, the breezy subject matter broke the ice and allowed him to speak comfortably. And for me, it put off the inevitable, which was the real reason I called the meeting. But as I glanced at the clock and saw the minutes flying by, I knew the cocktail hour was coming to a close and the entree needed to be served. So, I wanted to check in with you about your dad, I said slowly, probing Ian's face for any signs of reaction. His placid appearance reassured me to continue talking. I heard what happened, and I wanted to say, I'm so sorry for your loss. Yes, thank you, replied Ian quickly, almost before the words were off my lips, hoping to move the conversation along. As a natural silence fell over the room, I quickly jumped to fill it. After all, I was the adult here. I had asked him to come talk to me. I needed to have reassuring words of wisdom, but past I'm sorry for your loss, I didn't have much more planned. My dad passed away recently too, I sputtered clumsily, hoping Ian would see it as an inroad, awkward as it may, to say something more about his dad's passing. He just shook his head in silent acknowledgement. I asked him if he told anyone at school yet. He said only 1 or 2 people, but no one from our class. How do you feel about that? It must be hard. It's not the easiest thing to bring up, I bet. Ian's answers were surprisingly matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. But unlike his mother's business-like tone at the beginning of the year, which had been forged by necessity, Ian's tone came from a different place. There was a lot I knew he didn't know or understand about his father. I suspected he was still making sense of the whole situation. Ultimately, our conversation drifted back into the banalities of life, summer plans, favorite books. These topics were the rocks we could safely hold on to and catch our breath while crossing this lake of uncertainty. There's always uncertainty when talking about mortality, but I was also uncertain about Ian, about his feelings, about whether this lunch conversation had any impact or even helped. I finished with one last cliche. Just let me know if you need to talk. The words landed with a thud as Ian scurried away from the table as the sounds of classmates returning from lunch flooded the hallway. Lunch over, students clamored back into the room. Some unfinished conversations started in the cafeteria, while others moaned about writer's workshop, which was next on the class schedule. None, however, knowing the conversation that had just occurred in room 238. And amongst it all was me, lamenting a missed opportunity. I wasn't even sure what I'd expected to come of this conversation. I had no idea where Ian was emotionally, and what did I expect? Lunch is only 20 minutes long. 20 freaking minutes. What was I thinking? Did I even make a shred of connection, or had the fibers of those safety rope I extended to him been too feeble and weak? Over the next few months, I thought back on that day with regret many times. The rest of Ian's year was a slow ride with peaks and valleys. I watched Ian getting subtly pushed to the margins of his original peer group. Simultaneously, I watched as Ian's background knowledge in social studies was impressing a new peer group within the class. Ian's academic curiosity and his kind manner were being appreciated. They were carrying social currency with this new group of peers. I saw these new social connections as growth, but I wondered what Ian thought of them and the friendships lost along the way. So much loss. Mercifully, June arrived. It had been a hard year. It wasn't just Ian's situation, however. Across the board, it had been challenging, When friends would ask how the end of the year went, I joked that we'd limped across the finish line. As we neared the last day of school, the small tokens of thanks began to roll in, as they always do. A world's best teacher coffee mug, a hand-drawn thank you card, or perhaps a homemade picture frame. Each item precious. I've kept every one, 19 years worth. It's a ritual that happens literally every year, yet somehow, each year, I forget about it until the cards and gifts show up on my desk. They serve as reminders of connections. Connections that are most often formed organically, invisible. It's rare that I can look back and point at the moment of connection in most cases. That's why I was taken aback when I opened a thank you card from Ian's mom the last day of school. It read, "I can't even explain how grateful I am that you were Ian's teacher this year. Your support has been tremendous in a very challenging year for my family. To this day, I remember my third grade teacher, Mr. Bradford, as he had such an impact on how I viewed school and viewed myself. I'm positive you have had the same impact on my son, and thank you doesn't seem to be enough. You're a phenomenal teacher, and you should be proud of how much of an impact you have on your students. I hope you have a relaxing summer. Thank you." Reading the note, I realized there are no clear moments of connection. Looking for them is akin to a fool's game. Lunch with Ian seemed like that moment. I put lots of pressure on that being my shot to have that Dead Poet Society Captain My Captain moment with a student. In reality, that's not how it goes. What's more, because I'd felt like I'd stumbled during my lunch with Ian, falling flat and letting him know I was there for him, I became blind to all the other fibers of connection we'd made that year that seemed visible. The one moment I could recall, the one connection of the thousands that year that seemed visible, while admittedly inorganic, that moment was probably not the one. In fact, there probably was not just one moment, but several times, a series of times, conversations, interactions that built the relationship furtively outside of my conscious view. The connection had been invisible, despite my wishes for it to show itself and become obvious. While it was unrealistic for me to think I could control every moment in my classroom, I should take comfort in knowing that I had built a sturdy and meaningful series of connections within my classroom. And the fibers of those connections were stronger than one snippet from my lunch with Ian. The fibers may have been invisible, but they were powerful.
I hope you get a sense of what a pleasure it is to work with these people. It's a lot of this. A lot of Margaret's work was focused on supporting new teachers. Our next presenter, our next fellow, Jenna Lee, is going to talk about being a new teacher. She's a math specialist at Bristol, and I'm excited for you to hear her story.
Billy was in his seat at his desk for the first time all year. I watched him firm his grip around a pencil slowly and methodically like a python constricting its prey. It was his very first attempt to write something on a piece of paper as a fourth grader. My breath caught in my throat. This tiny boy with the spirit of an explosive leprechaun had arrived in my fourth grade classroom a week earlier, the new kid. Billy came to my school to participate in the Intensive Behavior Needs program. But unfortunately, he arrived several days before his special education paperwork, and the phone number given for his parents had been disconnected. Our behavior needs teacher had quit on the first day, wreaking general havoc across the school. And so I was left alone to teach this boy with the untamable bedhead and the bone-struck gray sparrow. I felt well armed with my liberal sensibilities and my knack for connecting with students. I was also far, far out of my realm of experience. I was 22. It was September, the very beginning of my teaching career. My principal, who had hired me based on faith and a resume padded with volunteer positions, encouraged me to use my professional judgment for almost everything, from curriculum to classroom management. I had real freedom, the kind that wising teachers reminisce about in the pre-No Child Left Behind era. Part of me relished it, and I bragged about it to friends, many of whom had been hired by schools that more closely resembled 1984. This freedom came at a great cost. I was alone, even when I was in desperate need of support. These moments were far more frequent than I could let my treading water self acknowledge. Billy must have felt like he was treading water too. He had to learn new rules and expectations and faces, all while dealing with, well, whatever his mysterious cognitive and psychological profile was. Upon his arrival, Billy immediately charmed me with his impish grin and his peculiar verbal tics. When he wanted to go to the water fountain, instead of using our class signal, he would tug at my clothes and explain that he was a bit parched. We both smiled. Later, like Dr. Jekyll morphing into Mr. Hyde, he would respond to a request to pick up a book by furiously hurling several pairs of scissors in the direction of two studious girls. I froze. This hadn't happened in any of my internships. I do not even remember what I did to stop the situation. Scream, run towards the girls, pull Bully away. But I do remember that my decision was born out of pure adrenaline, fight or flight. Afterwards, I reworked my classroom supply routines to impede access to scissors and allowed fear to root in me. I'm sure the students could tell. 10-year-olds can smell fear like dogs. Watching Billy with a pencil in hand now was a new sensation. He wasn't throwing paper at his neighbors. He wasn't maniacally spinning around the rug area screaming, "I'm a whirling dervish," as he crashed into his dismayed classmates. He wasn't swearing or running or rolling. He was writing. He looked like a student. I let my shoulders relax for perhaps the first time all day. My upper back ached with tension. It was draining to be in self-preservation mode all the time. I guarded my status as a first-year teacher jealously like a state secret, and I went home each day exhausted to the marrow. 99% of my energy went to projecting confidence. Throughout my teacher training, I had received praise for my insights about students. My cooperating teacher invited me to every parent-teacher conference. "You just know the kids so well," she gushed. I believed first and foremost in listening to and learning from students holistically. I remembered how my own fifth grade teacher had done this so artfully and how inspired my 10-year-old self felt to learn and grow at exponential rates. It's why I chose teaching. Now I felt a renewed need for a teacher like that. My colleagues smiled in the hallway, but avoided conversations with me. The bubbly, slightly unhinged new girl who liked to talk about education and social justice. On the surface, we had very little in common. Nearly all of them were solidly into their careers. Most left school by the bell. By 3 p.m. each day, I found myself suddenly alone in my no longer bustling classroom, brimming with nervous energy. The night janitor became my therapist. He was the only one that would talk to me. Most days, I scrambled like an understudy to prepare for my performance. Figure out what to do during literacy block, make certain my diabetic student Thomas made it to his regular insulin checks, re-engage Alex and his group in a science investigation. So much happened in a single day, a single hour, a single minute. I felt like I barely had time to catch my breath dealing with just typical classroom issues. So when Billy became physical, instead of listening to him or trying to understand, I removed other students from the vicinity. Problem temporarily solved. In retrospect, it makes sense that I did not see other students interact much with Billy during that first week. I imagined they were playing off my projected fear. Maybe that's what led them to sometimes treat Billy less like a valued classmate and more like a wolf they had stumbled upon in the forest. It went against everything I believed about education, and I didn't know how to break the cycle. But now, here Billy was, finally looking like he fit in with the rest of them, with his head bent and his left arm curled around his paper to shelter it from wandering eyes. Billy furrowed his brows as he drew the pencil to the top of the page. From several tables away, while trying to help John Michael start his work, I watched Billy making heavy, deliberate lines. He pursed his lips. For the first time all year, he looked focused. And then, "No!" Billy wailed as he rose from his chair. "Where is it?" The students at Billy's table cluster looked rattled. Mark inched his desk away from the group, and Ashley looked on with wide eyes and stiff body. It was happening again, so I rushed over. "What's going on, Billy? You've got this. You were off to a great start." "I can't see my work. I'm trying so hard and I can't even see it." I glanced down at his paper. I saw some rips, tokens of Billy's frustration, but he was correct. No writing. Although I had watched him press his pencil to the paper for over a minute, there was no evidence of any written work. I was afraid of what he might do next. My shoulders tensed. But then I looked down at the pencil, clenched in his hand. "Billy, are you writing with a white-colored pencil?" "Yes," he snapped, "of course." I took a deep breath. Something crumbled in me. My heart fell in sync with his. Despite all of our hard work, our successes felt obscured, if not invisible. "White-colored pencil is hard to see on white paper," I whispered. "I can't see anything. I hate this. I'm never doing math again." His wild eyes darted around the table, looking for something to throw. More deep breaths. What was probably 5 seconds felt like an eternity. I felt the heat of 27 pairs of eyes resting on me, waiting. In those early teaching days, I barely listened to my own thoughts as I bulldozed through the day. I knew I needed to slow down. This time I wanted to listen, like I used to, like I assumed I always would do. I crouched next to Billy to meet his gaze. "Why are you writing in white?" "I want to." "Do you want to try a regular pencil?" "No. No. I felt the situation swiftly moving away from me. "You were doing such a great job. Is there anything else you want to use to write?" Billy's chest, which had been rising rapidly with agitated breaths, started to fall. "Well, red is my favorite, but you didn't put a red pencil in the bin, so I used my second favorite color, white." Cautiously, I stood up and returned to the art supply area of the room. Billy ran over when he saw me reach for a red-colored pencil. He then returned to his desk, flipped over the crumpled paper, and started to draw on the back, in red. The rest of the students slowly returned to their work. Billy, though contained, no longer looked like the rest of them. He drummed his fingers polyrhythmically and jerked his head as he added detail to his drawing. For Billy, math was over. Billy and I continued to have a complicated relationship. He made me smile, genuinely and often. At night, I relayed adoring stories about him, doting over his eccentricities to a rapt audience of family and friends. These stories helped me bury how frustrated I felt. Not every crisis could be averted with a red pencil. And really, all students deserve a teacher who will be more proactive than reactive. At the same time, I resented my own empathy for Billy. He represented something I disliked in myself. He was an outsider, alienated and new, trying to belong. Perhaps he, like me, felt too exhausted and proud to acknowledge his failures. Perhaps I, like him, would have responded to heavy-handed advice from an authority by throwing scissors. We all have our limits. Now, more than a decade later, I've settled into a new professional home in Brookline. I no longer feel engaged in survival mode, like I did in those early days with Billy and his classmates. I have a much broader repertoire of proactive strategies and productive responses. I'm no longer the new kid. Nevertheless, I still have days every now and again when I feel like I am writing with a white-colored pencil, trying so hard that I leave rips and tears in the paper, but producing no symbols, no words, no evidence of the good. I've learned how to approach those days and when I need to ask for help. Even experienced educators who know how to use the system need support. Billy left our school the year after I had him in my 4th grade class, moving to another special education placement alleged to be a better fit. I wonder what strategies, if any, he learned for calming himself down. I wonder if he learned how to ask for help. I wonder if he ever understood or felt understood and felt known in his environment, or if he perpetually felt stuck in this cycle of feeling like the new kid.
So much of teaching is about forming relationships, but so much more of teaching is about being willing to rethink and to open yourself to new possibilities, to question yourself, to ask, how could I do this differently and maybe better? Our next piece from Lisa Ziegler-Chambly from Lincoln Middle School, special educator, gets us to think about that a little bit more.
Choosing a new response. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Viktor Frankl. As the daughter of two mental health professionals, I thought I would be a social worker. I tend to analyze and over-identify and empathize. But since the emotional needs of my students have escalated in the past few years, I needed some new ways to teach and cope with the turmoil. Over 1/3 of my caseload has had complex trauma, prolonged severe childhood trauma. And for many others, their lives included less clinically diagnosable forms of pain. A parent in prison, parents struggling with addiction, a severely disabled sibling. Stressed and unsure, I tried to integrate teaching and waitressing, my prior skill set. When things got difficult, I'd turn to food. Pretzels, I'd ask as I walked around with napkins and a snack. For a while, I even offered drinks and a choice of snack. Then I realized I'm really not running a snack bar. So instead, I returned to the social-emotional skills. These are obvious trouble spots for students: getting along with teachers and peers, self-discipline, and self-regulation. I let my students and the events in the classroom determine my curriculum. In the late fall, it started with his tossing a water bottle. First on the tables, then off the wall, hitting Sarah. The other kids in the room were nervous and excited. After a warning, I gently told him to stop. Then I tried using a time frame. In 30 seconds, put the water bottle away. Finally, I was more forceful. I'm going to take it from you, but knowing I couldn't. Meanwhile, Matt escalated quickly, singing, dancing, and hurling insults at students. Some students laughed, others told him to quit. He called one boy retarded. He told another she smelled like cigarettes, which was true. I couldn't let this happen. I felt panicky. I had to protect these kids. I had already called the office, no response. A couple of minutes later, the guidance counselor came up. Matt would not stop. The vice principal arrived. No more success. 3 adults and 5 students in my tiny room. He refused to leave. I was terrified of where this might go. We had to leave. The classroom next door was empty. We filed in, leaving Matt behind. In our next Learning Center class, I was determined to find some positivity and make amends for Tuesday's drama. Matt had already mumbled an apology to me, but I wanted the students to be involved. I handed out paper plates and covered the tables with some blank strips of paper. Students decorated their plates with their names, and then took turns blowing positive phrases onto one another's plates. It was still just the fall, I thought. We could reset. Matt's plate was filled with vague references to his antagonism, such as, "You are funny, you are memorable, you are fearless." I chuckled inside, thinking he was, in fact, fearless and memorable. But the next few weeks made me realize that using a few responsive classroom-inspired lessons would not be enough. He needed more, and so did I. Matt's meltdowns were a daily occurrence, and it was taking a toll. Would today be an angry explosion? Tears of frustration? Would he bolt? The following week, Matt came into Learning Center for a break from his social studies class. He crawled under the counter and wrapped his arms around his legs. He was a tiny package of a boy under there, looking like he was trying to become invisible. At the time, I had a class of 2 math students. I paused, walked over and whispered, "What do you need?" He shook his head. He buried his head in his knees and started to sob. I could see his body heaving up and down. I felt an urge to say something profound, something healing, or at least just sit with him. I told myself to move on to the students in front of me. As I taught, I continued to feel my mind pull me back to him, a yearning to help him, comfort him. But I knew what he needed most was a safe space. When he was ready, he would accept help. I realized most of my fears were in my mind, worrying about what brought him here, what he'd do next, how I could prevent it. I tried to breathe. I looked over. He was still just sitting under the counter. I I suddenly felt a flood of compassion for this boy. I let my body relax and started to let go of being needed. He got up about 5 minutes later, didn't say a word, and walked back to his class. In a later lesson, I again turned to the psychological realm. After having attended a Zones of Regulation conference, I had students categorize and color code their emotions. While I knew I might be building some emotional awareness, somehow Matt identifying he was in the red zone didn't seem enough. I had to start with myself. I was anxious every day, pulled emotionally between triage and teaching. While I could plan lessons, I couldn't execute them effectively. I couldn't think clearly, and I forgot ordinary information. My chest tightened just walking into the building. Driving home from school, I noticed my shoulders up so high, I had to consciously relax them down. Each night, when I lay my head down, the pain in my jaw hit me. I had not been aware I had clenched my teeth so much. I knew this feeling. I would freeze up for years when conflict arose. Matt's emotional arc reminded me of my father's. My father carried a lot of tension and would explode over little things. Unpredictably. It always felt so personal because he and I were very close. Later, he would draw me to him and apologize, even cry sometimes. I felt responsible for his emotions. It helped me notice the parallels from my childhood, but this time, I knew it was not personal. It took Matt's enormity of emotion for me to work myself out of the picture. Matt's rage, sadness, and frustration was bigger than any one person and would not be solved by me. By realizing this wasn't about me, paradoxically, I was able to be more there for him. I had to reconcile my lack of control. It was clear I could not rescue this student. Coming to terms with this felt like a turning point. I worked to consciously separate myself from my students' flare-ups of emotion, almost as an onlooker. I could hear the yelling and pounding and sobs as noise instead of an assault. I felt steadier, and I could better attune with students. But some days I drove home feeling, I am Matt. A lot of the time, I still want to be invisible. I want to escape under the counter too. I want to pound and stomp about the wrongs in education. I'm grateful to Matt and to all of my students. They remind me of the frailty of the human condition. They push me to look more deeply into my unskillful reactions. For the past few years, I've been practicing mindfulness, a kind-hearted, non-judgmental focus on the present moment. The trusting stance of mindfulness attracts me. The idea that we already have everything we need within us. The focus on knowing and accepting oneself. As the year advanced, I walked into school more mindful of my own state. I still noticed the tightness in my chest, but I breathed to ease my mind. I relaxed my shoulders down mid-morning and unclenched my jaw over lunch. I felt more grounded in the face of commotion. With recognition of my own state, I felt an opening, a choice in how I reacted when Matt got upset. I was more relaxed and could find humor in the imperfect moments. In a mindful-inspired lesson, I guided the class to develop an awareness of situational factors and self-talk. Students wrote positive, encouraging sayings to replace their negative thoughts. To my pleasant surprise, students were engaged. Suddenly, holding one of the slips of paper, Matt stood on his chair and shouted, "I am an effing diamond!" The whole class started to laugh, myself included. I told Matt he was a diamond. He smiled. We put it on the positive messages board.
One of my favorite TV shows is Iron Chef, where people are cooking and then the announcer comes in and says, the secret ingredient is kelp, right? And they have to cook with. So teaching feels like that often. There's a secret ingredient in the room that you discover that you have to make work. Dominique is going to tell us about a story with a different secret ingredient. Dominique from the VHS French, Latin, and Spanish classes, the world language teacher. Come on up.
Mine is called Growing Closer. Look at that fat squirrel, shouted Ethan. Whatever I'd been teaching was now irrelevant. 24 freshmen were hooting and pointing at a squirrel in a tree directly outside the window. The squirrel's round belly swayed as she moved down the branch closer to the window. With each step the squirrel took, the end of the branch made a scratching sound on the glass. The squirrel looked back at us. She was so close that I could see her ears twitch. Her gray fur looked soft and inviting. It was October and this class was going well. The students were eager to learn more Spanish and were working hard. One of my goals at this point in the year was to establish supportive relationships amongst the students. They had come from several different elementary schools and were still a little hesitant to open up to new peers. Students learn better when they make personal connections with each other. Common interests and shared experiences help create a tight-knit community. I had a solid curriculum, plenty of engaging ideas for classroom learning, and clear expectations for behavior. We were beyond name games, but they were essentially still strangers. What I needed were more ways for them to grow closer. They were all facing the squirrel. Es una ardilla, I said in Spanish. It's a squirrel. No one offered any response in Spanish. So I tried to get them to choose a word. Es gorda o delgada? Is it fat or thin? Still no reply. No one was going to play along with me when there was a fat squirrel staring at us. I considered climbing over backpacks and kneeling on a shelf to reach the window shade, but instead I decided to get back to the lesson. I mistakenly thought the interest in the squirrel would die down. These students were hard workers and they wanted to learn. I felt confident that my Spanish version of the classic "find someone who" activity would get them practicing the new verb tense and getting to know each other beyond first names. At this point, Ethan and his buddy Ty were posing in squirrel-like positions on their chairs. I made eye contact and asked them to get out their notebooks. Saquen los cuadernos, por favor, a redirection attempt to snuff out the squirrel mimicry. A few of the girls told Ethan and Ty that they were being immature, but being immature was the whole point. Ethan and Ty made squirrely clicking noises. Then the squirrel situation got a lot worse. A second squirrel scurried up the tree. This was a faster-moving squirrel, also gray and also fat. It made sense, I thought, that the local wildlife would be eating well. Our teenage students ate constantly, and our outdoor garbage cans overflowed with delicious scraps. Below my classroom, the school restaurant teased us with appetizing smells. I imagined the county fair scenes in Charlotte's Web, replacing the overfed Templeton the rat with our squirrel visitors. The giggling had died down earlier, but now it resurfaced. 2 fat squirrels, I yelled, delighted with the class's renewed interest. I felt my own annoyance giving way a little bit to curiosity. Would they chase each other? Could we get back to irregular preterite tense verbs? The first squirrel heaved her bloated body around, wobbled on the branch, and regained her balance. She was now facing us. The students leaned around each other to see what the squirrels might do next. We had lost enough learning time to this distraction, and I took a few steps toward the window with my hand raised toward the string that would close the shade. No, no, please, everyone shouted. A veritable zoo exhibit had materialized in front of us. They are still children, I told myself. Our presence did not bother the squirrels. The second squirrel stepped onto the branch. The first squirrel clasped her squirrely hands in front of her and sat up. Her eyes darted around the classroom, and she turned her head to watch the second squirrel. He was no lightweight either. The branch had scratched the window when one squirrel walked along it, but now it tapped the window. He moved in a pattern, scurry, wait, scurry, wait. With each scurry, the branch dipped and hit the window, and he waited for the movement to slow down before he advanced again. The class was mesmerized. I looked at the clock and saw that even if this event ended now, it would be too late to regain the lesson. Clase, por favor, I said. Maybe we could prep for my planned activity and then actually do it tomorrow. ¿Qué hacen las ardillas? I asked. What are the squirrels doing? Maybe we could use the verbs in a real-life context. I was a good teacher, darn it, and no squirrels are going to hijack my class. Here's where it went off the rails. Where this class went down in history with the funniest incident that has ever happened in a classroom since the beginning of formal education. The second squirrel approached the first squirrel from behind. She put her little hands down on the branch and held on. The second squirrel mounted her. Began copulating. The students' eyes were wide. For a brief moment, their mouths were open but noiseless. The branch moved with each squirrel's pelvic thrust. And it was no longer scratching the window or tapping the window. It was smacking the glass. The rutting sped up and the branch matched the rhythm on the glass. The students, choked, coughed, spat, and shed tears laughing, the lively and the solemn people alike. Ethan stomped both of his feet on the floor, hit the table with his hands, and threw his head back, tears streaming into his ears as he shrieked. I leaped around tables and over backpacks to reach the window shades, seized the string, and yanked it down. It seemed like the entire class ran toward me and lifted the bottom around the sides of the shade to see the action. This is where I surrendered my lesson plan to the unexpected event. No lesson plan could be forced despite all odds. I had been a teacher for at least a decade at this point, and I knew the students needed to find commonality. What I hadn't expected was that two rodents' biological impulses would be the icebreaker that would start to build our sense of community. Indeed, this was just the first of many shared experiences that year that would bring us closer to each other. 2 years later, I chaperoned a school trip to Italy with some of them. One student babysat my children. Several of them are still in touch with me on Facebook. How did it end, you ask? I'll tell you. When the students grabbed at the window shade and appeared suddenly in the window, they startled the squirrels, who separated. The squirrels hustled along the branch toward the trunk of the tree just as students from the next period's class started to enter the room. Ethan needed to inform the newcomers. 2 fat squirrels having sex! Class dismissed.
We made it from kindergarten all the way to high school. Our last presenter is Amy Morrissey from the BHS English department, and her piece is called November 10th. Amy.
When I saw the torch-carrying mob of young white men in khakis and polos heard their incantations of hate, I thought of my students first, the 42 of them, my just graduated seniors, about to set out for their own campuses to begin their lives as college students. They were going to New Orleans and Newark, Providence and Hanover, Atlanta and Washington, D.C. But as I watched the news footage, they were all going to Charlottesville. My initial grief and rage and sorrow were for them, entering a world where Nazis marched freely on campus. This world had unfolded beginning on November 10th, starting with A Block. Trump had won the election, and I had to teach both A and B blocks. I knew that I could show up and make coffee. I could offer them coffee, tea, or hot chocolate, something to treat. I could lug the grocery store bag brimming over with ground beans and assorted beverage packets, the tower of styrofoam cups, the Tupperware of sugar, the half-gallon of milk, the roll of paper towels to mop up spills. I could boil water, plug in the cord, arrange it all on the table. As usual, early birds Ariel and her boyfriend Daniel appeared at the door at least 5 minutes before the 8:20 start time, whispering to themselves about an upcoming test or college visit or happening with friends. They looked no different than usual. Leah, coming in on their heels, took in the spread of beverages and announced, "I get it, Ms. Morrissey. You're telling us we need to wake up and smell the coffee because Donald Trump is president." I chuckled, but his funny comment also made me aware of my role as an English teacher, tasked with delving into the human impact of public events. In particular, I was aware of my own role in shaping the conversation. I hardly felt up to the task. By 8:26, they were seniors after all 22 students were in the room. I scanned the faces in the circle with some anxiety, trying to read the tea leaves of their emotions. Liad asked me if I brought the coffee as a wake-up call to the American people, I began. Really, I just wanted to bring you all something this morning. Help yourselves. Privately, I wondered whether my offering implied a tragic or funereal atmosphere. It felt that way to me, but I sought to put out a more open posture to them. 5 minutes later, we began in earnest. I gave them the space to write what was on their minds that morning, along with the heads up that we do a go-round with the opportunity to share. Donald Trump would be our next president. What were their worries and hopes? They scribbled words and sipped hot beverages. I was grateful for the few minutes to collect my own thoughts on paper. When the go-round began, Sarah, a future nurse whose grandmother has Alzheimer's, spoke of her fears about health care with doleful eyes. Jessica spat out her concern over women's issues in a tone that was angry and with a side eye that suggested she was being forced to declare it the patently obvious. Lila glanced nervously around the room and said tentatively, "My family is pretty conservative. Our conversations at home were pretty different from the ones at BHS." Short, halting answers were the norm. No flow to the conversation today. David, a low-income student whose immigrant parents did restaurant work, muttered, "The economy." Though he did not speak to the issue of college affordability, I imagined it was on his mind. We rounded a back corner of the circle where 5 Black and Latino students sat in a row. Malik swept his head from side to side in what looked like a gesture of disbelief. Alex looked down at his desk, seeming to collect his thoughts, and said race, immigration. Celine sat poised and attentive, taking her moment. From what I know about him, police brutality and mass incarceration are going to get much worse, and this makes me worried for the people I know. Daniel, one of the early birds, spoke with a relaxed confidence. I think people are making it out to be worse than it could be. He's unpredictable, so we don't know what will happen next. Ariel, sitting next to him, said softly, "My parents vote Republican because of Israel. We're dual citizens. It's complicated." As we came to the final speakers, my anxiety grew. How could I synthesize, tie it all up, make meaningful but not overly dogmatic connections to all the discussions we've had so far about our intersectional identities, our positioning on an ideological spectrum, and, because this was English class, the power of narrative and story. I don't recall exactly what I said, but I know I managed adequately. They left. Several thanked me for the hot drinks. Something had transpired in what, for me and for many of them, must have felt like a fraught space, and for that I was grateful. At some point later on November 10th, I realized that I was in a new reality, not just as an American citizen, but as a teacher. In the previous weeks, it had been easy for my students to, and me to call out the ugliness of grab her pussy, bad hombres, and lock her up, to chuckle at it's gonna be bigly. We had rested in a comfortable Brookline liberal consensus, aligning the differences among us. Now things felt riskier, the fault lines in the group exposed. I needed to move on from open sharing. We needed words, tools. The next day I armed myself, turning to my old standby, the New York Times editorial page. I brought in a slew of op-eds, David Brooks, Tom Friedman, Maureen Dowd, Paul Krugman, Charles Blow. There was reading time, a protocol for structured discussion. It felt safer to begin with other people's words and rules of engagement. In small groups, they shared lines from the op-eds and their responses. The scariness of a president who lacks mental stability and personal discipline, the awareness that a lot of Americans were like the outlier family members who voted for Trump, the sense that as a person of color, one no longer feels ownership over one's country. I heard a couple of white students pushing back against the apocalypse metaphor used by one writer, melodramatic, overblown. At the end of class, Karina sat at her desk shaking her head. People in my group were saying Trump's not the apocalypse, but for Black people, he is. In the coming months, we would move from newspaper editorials to literature, specifically the dystopias of novel The Handmaid's Tale and the film Children of Men. Despite the fact that my students had a range of social locations and political beliefs, many would identify powerfully with the protagonists of these stories fighting for dignity in a world of evil and oppression. I watched young women react viscerally to a Fred's confinement as a reproductive slave in an elite household. I watched young men glued to Theo's every move as he transformed from a tired average Joe to an unlikely hero. There was a new urgency in the curriculum, and it had become brewing, unbeknownst to me at the time, on that overwhelming morning after the election. What was going on in our country terrified me, but showing up to teach every morning felt invigorating. Yes, I went to the protests, but I poured most of my post-election energy into my seniors. In a country that was deeply divided, my students could still talk to each other in their medium-sized tent that accommodated the moderately conservative to the far left. When I couldn't stomach the news, I could read their imperfect, messy, thoughtful papers. When I felt paralyzed, I could take in their relative absence of cynicism. As the school year ended, I found myself listless, ruminative, unable to relax for the first few weeks of summer. I felt embarrassed by how much I missed my students. A friend said, "You have a hopeful job." She was right. And as cliched as it sounds, my students give me hope. November 10th, 2016, I learned that I could lay the grounds, and together, my students and I could
the graduate class I took with Margaret Metzger, she would draw on the board a triangle of teacher, student, and content. And the last day of the class, she reminded us that the center of the triangle is love. And when I hear all 6 of these, I'm reminded of the love in the Brookline schools, and I'm grateful to be someone who got a chance to work with you. I want to thank the BEF for supporting us and for making this possible, and I'd like to turn it over to Emily Dolbert to just give one more thank you to the BEF for helping us do this Margaret Metzger Fellowship.
One more moment of recognition for his unstinting support of teachers and their work in the classroom and on the page. We thank John Andrews. And I'm going to take another moment to say hooray for the 3rd year of the Margaret Metzger Fellows. Support in order to continue this fellowship program into a 4th, 5th, and 50th year. Please consider supporting us and our mission, helping teachers be their best. There are cards outside you may have gotten on the way in, or they're in a basket out there. You can look at them, fill them out, and leave them in the basket. We really appreciate your support of our teachers in evenings like this that make us very proud to be a part of the system. So thank you very much for coming. I invite you to enjoy us to have some treats. I think there's some sushi left over. So thank you very much for coming.